I've got a couple of results here in front of me from our dovetail critique that we offered people. If they would send in their dovetails, we would critique them, and it will be very helpful for many people who are working on their dovetails. And I'm looking at Michael McGlinchey's from Glasgow, because he sent his in, and he sent in his self-critique here. It says, "This is my third dovetail joint by hand. I found keeping the saw line straight on all planes difficult, and also chiseling close to the knife wall and cleaning up." Well, don't we all? You're right there, Michael. So removing small amounts were difficult for him at the end. Also using the chisel on the shoulder of the joint, particularly difficult in general. I will also add I have made a lot of furniture using power tools, and I'm only now starting to teach myself with hand tools. Okay, this is this dovetail. Actually, I looked at the overall of the dovetail, and I was impressed. For a third dovetail, I thought it was great. And you did choose a hardwood, which is a little bit harder because there isn't the compressibility that you get with, say, spruce or pine or something like that. Those woods will compress. Oak will compress, but not quite as much. It's got a bit more rigidity to it. And also, oak is a coarse-grained wood. It's not a smooth-grained wood. And so that gives you a little bit more of an obstacle to work with. So let's take a look. I've made myself some notes here. And one of the top of this, on the top of my note, I was saying to Michael, stay with it, stick with it. You're going to make a great hand tool enthusiast and a hand tool woodworker. So let's take a look at the things I found. And the first thing I do is, as I do with all joinery with my students, wherever I am, the first thing I do, bring into play is what? The square. The most important tool in the workshop is the square. The first thing I wanted to do was to see how square his squareness was. And he was square across the face of the flat face, the large flat face, perfectly. And when I flipped over and did the same, and I did it from both edges, everything was dead square that way. So where did we go wrong here? On this one, we went wrong right here. And it seems a small thing, and this is what I want to encourage you with, Michael. Accuracy is everything. Accuracy is sensitivity, and it's what we do to show that we care. I've got a gap on this side, and if I turn over and put the square on the same recess, I've got no gap here where the square meets the bottom of the tail recess. I have no gap. That means you cut out of square. So I retraced your steps, and I'll show you what I did. I flushed it here on your knife wall on this side. I went into the corner, and I can see your knife nick is right there. It's a perfect knife nick, not very big, exactly what you need. So I stand this up, put my knife into your knife nick, the existing knife nick, and slide up, and I've got a 1 millimeter difference. So when you transferred to this side, that was where you didn't quite keep that line, and you stepped away from where it should be by that 1 millimeter. So if I put the square onto this face and I go to your knife nick, it looks perfect. It's lined up perfectly. But in reality, it should be 1 millimeter further down. And if that had happened, it would mean that when we put your tails into the recess, it wouldn't have shown us a gap. So let me take a look from the end grain here. I'm going to put my square on here, and I don't know if you'll be able to get it, but I can certainly get it. What I've got here, I'm flush. Right there is where my square is flush, and down here I've got about 0.5 millimeter, which is a cork in the bottle effect when you put your dovetails in. So that's slightly out of square from the end, and slightly out of parallel, and I've got the same here. So what we end up with is the cork inside the bottle effect, and the same on this one. I had the same here. So when I put the dovetails in, it's going tighter and tighter and tighter. And you've made your own notes on here. Your own self-critique is fine. So when you put this onto here, and we start, let me hammer this together, see if I can get this to go down into the recess. I can feel it tightening up. So when we marked it on the outside, it was perfect. But then all the way along here, we have a very small gap. It's not huge. That's quite a big one there. And we've got a little gap here. That little gap is because you were slightly out of parallel in the delivery of that recess. So that's one thing. So what else have we got to look at here? Look at this. And I know some of you out there will say, oh, Paul, you're being so critical. There's a small gap here. If I go to this side, there's a small gap here. We all get it. Every time you make a dovetail, something like that can happen. What we have in the middle here is quite a big gap. It's about 1 millimeter. And that happened because we were slightly out of square again, front to back. Let me take this hammer to it. So now we're looking at the pin recesses. If I take my square on here this time, so I'm flushing it on the extremes, on the outside edges, squeezing across here to keep it tight. I'm tight on the corner here, but right here I've got a very definitive step of about 1 millimeter. Flush here, and again another shoulder there, and then in the middle I'm actually flush. So I look from the inside, take my square on the inside face, and there I've got that. It's a little bit over 1 millimeter. If that was square across, I think we would have been good. When you put this together, this shoulder is tight. On the outside, it shows the gap. So it's really a question of just pair cutting a little bit. And the one thing I must encourage you with, if you found pair cutting difficult, it may well be that your chisel isn't as sharp as you might want it to be. It may still cut wood fine, but when you get that ultra sharp, it's worth going to the stones just before you do those pair cuts and pair cutting right into that knife wall and keeping the knife wall as your guide. And I think that would help you greatly. Square across here, not quite. Again, when I put the square on, I've got a gap on the camera side, on your side, I've got a slight gap. And then here, there's not much registration face. That one's fine. That one, I think I'll have to tell you that's definitely 1 millimeter out of square. So what's happening is when we start this in the recess here, it's going in just fine. It's perfect. It's marked perfectly. There are no gaps on any one of those. But as you drive it in, the wood on this is compressing and it just exaggerates the gap. So I think, Michael, I think you've done great. I think you should keep after this and keep doing it. Do another 4 or 5 dovetails just like this and just improve with each one. If I were to pair this, there's enough compression in the wood on this. If I were to pair cut this and get it where it should be, these joints would still fit. And that's what you could have done. But I was glad that you took them straight off the saw, because ultimately what you don't want is to pair cut the shoulders so much as just to trim off any fibre of any fuzzy parts. That's all, not trim it to the shoulder lines. Try to get it straight off the saw. That's what the ultimate goal is with any dovetailing, is to get it straight off the saw. You get a much nicer fit. Well done, Michael, well done. So that's that one, and I don't think there's any more notes except that I would persevere. You've definitely got it, and it's just a little bit of practice. This one is from Tyler McNamee from Grafton in Wisconsin. So I have made 2 boxes using dovetail joints to date. So these would be my 17th and 18 dovetails. I've never been able to make a joint without any gaps, and for the life of me, I cannot figure out why there is a gap on the outside baseline. I'm making some boxes for my friend that will be made with dovetails. I also want to partially follow Mr. Sellers' series, making a tool cabinet, so I can make a small closet for my little girls to hang all their princess play dresses in. Thanks so much for this opportunity. My notes here are, the first dovetail is slightly out of square. Let's take a butcher's hook at this. There we are. If I took my square, let me see how can I do this here, across the inside face, it looks pretty good on the bulk of this where the square actually touches, but right on the outside edge I have about 0.5 millimeter along the first part, which is going to show us a gap on the outside edge. When I put this together, tap it home, Now when I'm tapping, I'm listening. So when I tap here, listen, I get a different sound. This one is much tighter. Now is it tight because of the width of the dovetail, or is it tight because the pin is tight in between the pin reset, the tail parts? See here? That's much looser on that one. So this one's tighter on this, on my right. Now overall, I would say that's a good dovetail. Can you see this gap on this outside corner is what I was anticipating would be, because somehow you managed to just slightly twist the saw as you were cutting, and it took more off this outside edge of your dovetail. Not very much. In fact, I would even say that if you were to glue this, there's a good possibility that the glue would expand that gap, and the glue would hold it in its outside position, so it would probably close up that gap. I'm fairly confident of that. It does show us a gap along the edge here. As I say, that would probably swell. And what else did I say? Square leaves a gap on the outside. Last pin slightly out of parallel. Okay, this is another common mistake, is to think that you can have the parallel lines, whoops, am I going the wrong way? I am. Is to have the parallel lines out of parallel. So if I take my finger on this one here, like this, so I'm going to run a line like this here. He's already got a line. If I go right on the corner here, I'm flush with that corner. As I go down here, you'll see a gap appears, or the line is out of parallel, should I say. If I move over to this one, let's see. I'm going to put a line on the wood, just so we can do a comparison line. That one's pretty good, and so is this one here. Those are very nice. Let's see what this one does. If I go right on the inside corner, I do get a little bit of a bulb inside there. That's going to tighten up, but that will compress. When I put this together, I did notice one thing. So you want to make sure you get those walls as crisp and as clean as you can. Remember I said this one I could hear it was tight. Can you hear that? It's tight. And where it becomes evident is right on this inside corner here. There's a crack appearing. So that crack is a direct result of it being too tight. This one was not tight, but what was tight, it was tight between this point and this point. So when this was being hammered in, I got another crack on the inside here, which means the overall two dovetails were just a little bit too wide and too tight. So that's why we've ended up with a crack there and a crack there. It probably would be fine once it's glued. It would become one. It would be united. The only thing that I had left, if there was a criticism, is this step on the side here. And what that is a misalignment of the two pieces, because they are the same size, so it was just nudged over a little bit, and that led to a step on the side, and a step on this edge here, which may not be critical, but it can be critical when you've made a draw and you have a 1 millimeter step on both sides. You can end up being 2 millimeters undersized if you're not careful of that. But this again is another one of those great dovetails, and I would hate for you to think that you don't have it, because you do. Both of you have it, and I'm very impressed with both of you. That was a great critique. Thank you for sending it in, and I really appreciate everything that you've done. I did try to reverse this, which I do sometimes, and I thought it was pretty close. You know, when you reverse, when you're checking somebody's dovetails, you've got the dovetail was originally in this way. When you flip over and go this way, there was just barely a millimeter difference, which means it was only 0.5 millimeter out of sight. So your accuracy levels were really very good. So thank you, both of you. That was great.